A billionaire looked at a waitress and asked her one question. He thought he was playing a game. He thought he was about to humiliate her in front of the richest people in New York. But when she answered using just 6 words, his entire empire collapsed in less than 10 minutes. $22 billion gone. A 32-year prison sentence guaranteed. And it all started because he didn't know that the woman serving his drink was the daughter of someone he'd killed. This is the true story of how the invisible woman brought down a giant. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at powerful people the same way again. Stay with me because what happens next will shock you. Welcome to Tales of Triumph. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about a night that changed everything. A night when the smallest person in the room became the most powerful. This happened in New York at a place called the Empire Lounge on November 15, 2025. And I need you to understand something before we begin. Sometimes the people we don't see are the ones watching us the most carefully. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 29 years old and she worked as a waitress at the Empire Lounge, one of the most exclusive private clubs in all of New York, the kind of place where a single dinner costs more than most people earn in a month. Emily earned $15 an hour. She had been working there for almost a year, moving through crowds of wealthy people like a shadow, carrying trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than her weekly wages. But before we dive deeper into that fateful night, let's step back and understand how Emily ended up in this world of glittering excess and hidden cruelties. Emily grew up in a small industrial town in Pittsburgh, where the air was thick with the smell of factories and the sound of machinery humming day and night. Her childhood was simple, filled with the warmth of family dinners and the struggles of making ends meet. Her mother, Margaret Carter, was the heart of that home, a strong, resilient woman who worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter. Margaret wasn't just any worker. She was a dedicated employee at a sprawling chemical plant owned by a colossal corporation called Vanguard Pharmaceuticals. For over 18 years, Margaret clocked in every day, handling hazardous materials that promised to clean the world but slowly poisoned her body. The plant was a relic of old industry, with outdated equipment and safety measures that were more for show than for protection. Workers like Margaret wore flimsy masks that barely filtered the toxic vapors, and the ventilation systems were notorious for breaking down, leaving the air heavy with fumes that burned the eyes and seared the lungs. Complaints were filed, reports were written, but they vanished into the bureaucracy of a company that prioritized profits over people. Emily remembered visiting her mother at work as a child, the massive machines towering like monsters, the workers moving like ghosts in their protective gear. "This is what hard work looks like, sweetie," Margaret would say with a smile, hiding the cough that was already starting to plague her. But as Emily grew older, she saw the toll it took, the exhaustion in her mother's eyes, the way she came home smelling of chemicals, the subtle shakes in her hands from years of exposure. On this particular night at the Empire Lounge, the club was hosting its annual autumn gala. This wasn't just any party. This was where tech moguls, finance titans, and real estate barons gathered to celebrate their triumphs. The women wore jewelry that could fund entire communities. The men wore watches that could purchase luxury cars. And Emily, she wore a simple black uniform with a white collar, her dark hair pulled back tight, her feet aching in shoes she'd owned for 4 years. She kept her head down as she worked. That was the rule for people like her. Be invisible, be efficient, don't make eye contact unless spoken to. She had learned this lesson well. In this world, waiters and waitresses weren't people. They were furniture that moved. But Emily had a reason for being there that night, a reason that had nothing to do with the small paycheck she would receive at the end of the week. She was there for justice. She was there for her mother. Let me tell you about her mother, Margaret Carter. Margaret had worked for 18 years at a factory in Pittsburgh that manufactured chemicals for industrial solvents and pharmaceuticals. The factory was owned by a massive corporation called Vanguard Pharmaceuticals. For 18 years, Margaret breathed in toxic fumes every single day. The ventilation system was faulty, often clogged with residue from the production lines. The safety masks they were given were cheap and ineffective, tearing easily and offering little protection against the volatile organic compounds that filled the air. The workers complained repeatedly, union meetings were held, petitions were signed, but the company ignored them, citing budget constraints and promising fixes that never came. 4 years ago, Margaret collapsed at work during her shift. She had been feeling weak for months, dismissing it as fatigue from long hours. The doctors diagnosed stage 4 lung cancer. It had metastasized to her bones and liver. She had never smoked a day in her life. The cancer came from the chemicals she breathed at that factory, years of exposure to benzene and other carcinogens that the company knew were dangerous but chose to downplay. Margaret and 50 other workers filed a lawsuit against Vanguard Pharmaceuticals, demanding compensation for their medical bills, lost wages, and unimaginable suffering. But Vanguard was a behemoth. They had lawyers that cost $1,500 an hour. They had lobbyists in Washington. They had money that could bury scandals deeper than any grave. The case dragged on for months, with motions and delays, until it was dismissed on technicalities engineered by the company's legal team. The workers got nothing, not a penny for their pain, not an apology for their losses. Margaret died 8 months later in a modest hospice room, her breaths shallow and labored, her medical bills leaving Emily drowning in debt that threatened to swallow her future. Emily had held her mother's hand in those final days, listening to her whisper regrets about not fighting harder, about trusting a system that saw her as expendable. "Promise me you'll live fully, Emily," Margaret had said, her voice weak but fierce. "Don't let them win." And the man responsible, the CEO of Vanguard Pharmaceuticals, he was here tonight celebrating at the Empire Lounge. His name was Richard Hargrove. He was 65 years old, worth $22 billion, and he didn't lose a single minute of sleep over the workers his company had killed. Richard had risen to power through ruthless ambition, starting as a junior executive and climbing the ladder by cutting corners and crushing competitors. His boardroom was legendary for its cutthroat decisions, where human costs were just numbers on a spreadsheet. Emily's manager grabbed her arm as she refilled her tray in the kitchen. "Emily, I need you in the Platinum Suite, the VIP section." Lisa called in sick. Emily's heart started beating faster. The Platinum Suite, that's where Richard Hargrove would be. "I usually work the main floor," Emily said quietly. "Not tonight," her manager insisted. "It's quadruple pay for tonight. And if you refuse, don't bother coming back. Tomorrow." Emily thought about the bills stacked on her kitchen table, the funeral expenses she was still paying off, the lawyer fees from the failed lawsuit, the student loans from her abandoned college dreams. She needed every penny. "I'll do it," she whispered. She picked up her tray of premium scotch and walked through the thick silk curtains into the Platinum Suite. The atmosphere was different here. Quieter, more intense. These weren't just wealthy people. These were the people who controlled the wealth. 20 men and women sat around a grand oak table, talking in low voices about hostile takeovers, market manipulations, and insider deals. And at the head of the table sat Richard Hargrove. He looked exactly like he did in the business magazines, tall, with salt and pepper hair, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than a small house. He was laughing at his own anecdote, his voice booming with arrogance. He was recounting how he'd dismantled a rival firm in the biotech sector. "I told him," Hargrove laughed, his drink sloshing in his hand, "you can cling to your ethics or cling to your market share. You can't have both." The table erupted in sycophantic laughter. These people found ruthlessness amusing. Emily moved silently around the table, refilling glasses, replacing coasters. She made herself as small as possible. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady through sheer determination. She approached Hargrove's chair. His glass was nearly empty. She reached forward to replace it with a fresh one. "Don't touch that," Hargrove said sharply. His voice cut through the laughter like a blade. Everyone went silent. Emily froze, her hand hovering over the glass. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, keeping her eyes down. You thought. Hargrove interrupted, turning in his chair to look at her. His eyes were cold, like shards of glass. "I don't pay for waitresses who think. I pay for waitresses who obey." "Yes, sir," Emily whispered. She tried to back away, but Hargrove raised his hand. "Wait." That single word felt like a trap snapping shut, and Emily knew in that moment that everything was about to change. Richard Hargrove stood up from his chair. He was a towering man, over 6 feet tall, and he used his presence to dominate. Emily was 5 feet 5 inches. She felt like a child before a tyrant. Hargrove walked around her slowly, inspecting her like a commodity. The other guests watched with amusement. This was entertainment for them, watching a Titan toy with a minnow. "What's your name?" Hargrove asked. "Emily, sir." "Emily," he repeated, savoring it. "You look nervous, Emily. Do I make you nervous?" "No, sir. I just want to do my job properly." "Your job?" Hargrove scoffed. He turned to the table. "Do you see this, everyone? This is the problem with the lower class. No drive, no foresight, happy to serve while we build empires." A few people chuckled. Emily felt her face burning with humiliation and rage. "Tell me, Emily," Hargrove continued, stepping closer. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir. You're Mr. Hargrove. And do you know what I do?" Emily knew exactly what he did. She knew about the factory. She knew about her mother. She knew about the 50 workers who got sick and received nothing. But she kept her voice neutral. "You run Vanguard Pharmaceuticals, sir." "Run?" Hargrove laughed. "I forged Vanguard Pharmaceuticals from the ground up. I employ 40,000 people across 6 continents. I develop drugs that revolutionize medicine. I am the backbone of American innovation." Emily said nothing. The drugs his company developed were priced so high that average families went bankrupt trying to afford them, but she held her tongue. Hargrove reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a platinum credit card holder, but then switched to his checkbook for dramatic effect. He held it up so everyone could see. "I'm feeling generous tonight," Hargrove announced to the room. "I want to play a little game." Emily's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from powerful men playing games with ordinary women. "I'm going to ask you one simple question, Emily," Hargrove said, opening the checkbook. "Just one question. If you answer it honestly, I will write you a check right now for $75,000. Gasps rippled around the table. $75,000. That was more than Emily earned in 4 years. That was enough to clear her debts and start anew. That was a lifeline. "And if I get it wrong?" Emily asked quietly. Hargrove smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Then you're fired. And I'll ensure you never work in any venue in New York again." "I have connections everywhere, Emily. Everywhere." The threat hung heavy in the air. Emily looked at the faces around the table. Some looked thrilled. Some looked uneasy. But none would intervene. None would challenge this. "Why?" Emily asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I'm bored," Hargrove shrugged. "And I want to see if someone like you has any shred of integrity. The underclass always deceives, always whines about victimhood. I want to see if you're an exception." Emily took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was why she had spent a year working at this club, eavesdropping, collecting scraps of information from overheard conversations, building her case piece by piece. This was why she had endured the condescension, the endless shifts, the blistered feet. For this precise moment. "Ask your question," Emily said. Hargrove's smile widened. He thought he had her trapped, desperate, ready to debase herself for cash. He had no idea who he was truly facing. "Look around this room, Emily," Hargrove said, gesturing grandly. "Look at the art on these walls. Masterpieces worth tens of millions. Look at the jewelry these ladies are wearing. Rubies and sapphires worth more than your family's legacy. Look at this table. Exotic wood from Brazil, handcrafted by artisans." He paused for effect, relishing his dominance. "My question is simple," Hargrove said softly. What is the most expensive thing in this room? The guests started murmuring. One woman fingered her sapphire earrings. A man eyed the sculpture in the corner, an original by a renowned artist. They thought it was a riddle. Hargrove watched Emily carefully, anticipating her to name something trivial, ready to ridicule her ignorance. But Emily didn't look at the art. She didn't look at the jewelry. She stood perfectly still, her face shifting from apprehension to resolve, something sharper. Something lethal. She looked Richard Hargrove directly in the eye. She didn't blink. She didn't avert her gaze. "Do you really want me to answer that, Richard?" she asked. She didn't call him sir. She didn't call him Mr. Hargrove. She used his first name. The room went absolutely silent. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. The guests exchanged shocked glances. No one spoke to Richard Hargrove like that. No one. Hargrove's smile faltered for a moment. A fissure in his armor, but he masked it with a sneer. "Richard," he repeated, "it seems our little waitress has forgotten her station." "Security, you asked me a question," Emily interrupted. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried an undeniable authority. "You offered $75,000 for an honest answer. Are you retracting your offer because you're scared of what I'll say?" Hargrove's hand hovered over the discreet button under the table that would summon security. But he hesitated. His pride was immense. Calling guards on a petite waitress would make him appear feeble before his elite peers. "I fear nothing," Hargrove said icily. "Say whatever you like, girl. Then collect your pink slip and leave." Emily smiled. But it wasn't a joyful smile. It was the smile of someone who had bided their time for this exact reckoning. "All right, then," Emily said. "Let me tell you what the most expensive thing in this room really is." Emily began to walk slowly around the table. Her footsteps echoed in the hushed room. Every eye was on her. The guests looked bewildered, off balance. This wasn't the script. The waitress was supposed to be demeaned, not dominating the narrative. "To answer your question properly," Emily said, "we need to understand what value truly means. You think value is a dollar amount. You think it's what something fetches at Sotheby's. But you're mistaken." She stopped behind an elegant woman wearing a lavish ruby necklace. The woman fidgeted uneasily. "Take Mrs. Elena Thornton, for example," Emily said, gesturing to the woman. "That ruby necklace she's wearing is insured for $3 million. Stunning, isn't it?" Elena touched her neck anxiously. "How dare you? It's a counterfeit," Emily said calmly. "The authentic piece was auctioned off 9 months ago in Paris to settle debts from her husband's insider trading scandal. She dons this duplicate to prevent their investors from discovering their crumbling finances." Elena's face blanched. Her husband stared at her in dismay. The other guests began whispering urgently. Hargrove rose. "That's enough. I'm not done," Emily said, her voice slicing through his. "You posed a question. I'm responding." She moved to the next guest, an older gentleman with a gleaming ring. "And you, Mr. Harold Benson," Emily continued, "that diamond ring on your finger is valued at $200,000. Quite the statement, except it was funded by laundered money from your offshore accounts in the Caymans. If the IRS audited your phone in your briefcase right now, you'd be facing federal charges by dawn." Harold's cigar fell from his lips, ash scattering on the carpet. The room descended into disarray. People were standing, protesting, but Emily's voice soared above the din. She circled to another guest, a sharp-dressed executive in his 40s. "Mrs. Sophia Langford," Emily said, pointing to her pearl bracelet. "Those pearls are appraised at $500,000, harvested from rare South Sea oysters. Impressive heirloom, or so you claim. But they were gifted by a lover who's also your company's chief rival, in exchange for trade secrets that could tank your firm's stock if exposed." Sophia gasped, her hand covering her mouth as her companion glared. The murmurs grew louder, a wave of unease rippling through the suite. Emily didn't stop. She approached a fourth guest, a tech entrepreneur with a flashy tie pin. "Mr. Nathan Reeves," she said, That gold tie pin embedded with rare gems is worth $100,000. A symbol of your success. But it was purchased with funds siphoned from your startup's venture capital, meant for employee salaries. Your team is on the verge of a walkout, and if the venture board sees the receipts on your tablet over there, your unicorn company becomes a myth. The chaos intensified. Chairs scraped back, voices overlapped in indignation. Hargrove banged his fist on the table. This is preposterous. Who do you think you are? Emily ignored him, her composure unyielding. She revealed two more secrets. One about a politician's wife whose earrings hid bribes from lobbyists, and another about a banker's cufflinks bought with embezzled client funds. Each revelation peeled back layers of facade, exposing the rot beneath the glamour. The guests were no longer amused, they were terrified, their own vulnerabilities laid bare. Do you want to know what the most expensive thing in this room is? Emily asked, locking eyes with Richard Hargrove. She reached into her apron pocket. Everyone tensed, perhaps fearing a gun. Instead, she pulled out a small recording device. It was worn, dented, hardly worth $15 at a flea market. She placed it on the table before Hargrove. This, Emily said, this is the most expensive thing in this room. Hargrove stared at the device, confusion mingling with dread. Deep, visceral dread. What is that? He demanded, his voice trembling. It's a recording, Emily said. From October 12, 2018. Do you remember that date, Richard? Hargrove's face drained of color. His knees buckled slightly. That was the date, Emily continued, her voice gaining strength, when the safety inspector visited your factory in Pittsburgh, the factory where my mother worked, where she inhaled toxic chemicals every single day for 18 years. The room fell utterly silent. The inspector told you the ventilation system was critically failing, Emily said. He told you workers were reporting respiratory issues. He told you that without immediate repairs, lives would be lost. Do you remember what you said to him? Hargrove sank into his chair. Stop, he murmured. You said. Emily pressed play on the device. A grainy recording filled the room. It was unmistakably Richard Hargrove's voice, authoritative and dismissive. Listen up, the recorded voice said. I don't give a damn about ventilation. I care about the bottom line. Upgrading that system costs $3 million. I'm not wasting that on laborers who can be replaced. If they fall ill, we'll pay them off quietly and slap NDAs on them. I've got judges on speed dial. I've got senators in my debt. No one's coming for me. Take this briefcase, file a clean report, and we're all golden. The recording ended with a click. The ensuing silence was profound. Every person at that table gaped at Richard Hargrove in revulsion. They were predators sensing weakness. My mother, Emily said, her voice cracking for the first time, was Margaret Carter. She worked in that factory for 18 years. She died of lung cancer 4 years ago because you deemed her life not worth $3 million. Tears flowed down Emily's cheeks, but she let them fall. She wanted them witnessed. 50 workers got sick, Emily continued. 50 families sued, and you obliterated them. You bribed the courts. You influenced the lawmakers. You erased the case and then waltzed into places like this to boast about it. Hargrove scanned the table frantically. This is a fabrication. The recording's doctored. This woman is delusional. I'm not done, Emily said. Because here's the kicker, Richard. You're not just on that recording. There are 15 other recordings. 15 other dialogues where you confess to corrupting regulators, forging inspection logs, and muzzling ailing employees. She pulled out her phone and held it aloft. And 10 minutes ago, Emily said, before entering this room, I uploaded every single recording to the web. I dispatched them to CNN, to the New York Times, to Congress, to the FBI. I sent them everywhere. Hargrove lunged across the table, clawing for the phone. Hand that over. It's too late, Emily said, retreating. It's already out there. The world sees you for the monster you are. Hargrove collapsed back, his hands covering his face. He appeared to have aged decades in minutes. That recording, Emily said softly, cost my mother her life. It cost 50 families their peace. But now, Richard, it's going to cost you your world. She regarded him with a blend of sorrow and resolve. That's the most expensive thing in this room, Emily said. The truth. And unlike your billions, the truth can't be purchased, can't be suppressed, and can't be eradicated. The doors to the Platinum Suite burst open. It wasn't security to escort Emily. It was Emily's manager, ashen and alarmed, trailed by 4 federal agents. Mr. Hargrove, one of the agents said, a stern man with a no-frills demeanor. I'm Special Agent Michael Reyes. We need you to come with us. Hargrove rose, attempting to muster authority. This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? I'll have your careers ended. We've reviewed the recordings, sir, the agent cut in. All 15 of them. We've also secured statements from the factory safety inspector you bribed. He's cooperating fully. We're arresting you for corporate homicide, bribery, perjury, and wire fraud. The other guests fled toward the exits, distancing themselves from the fallout. Within moments, the suite that had brimmed with influence was vacant, save for Hargrove, the agents, and Emily. Hargrove glared at Emily with venom. You believe you've triumphed. You think this alters the game. I have the top attorneys in the nation. I'll be free by sunrise. Perhaps, Emily said calmly. But you won't have your empire. As if timed, her phone vibrated. She displayed the screen for Hargrove to see. That's a breaking news notification, Emily said. Your board convened an urgent session 30 minutes ago. They ousted you as CEO. Vanguard Pharmaceuticals is severing all links to preserve their image. Hargrove's expression shattered. No, that's impossible. I founded that company. You control 38%, Emily corrected. The rest of the shareholders hold 62%. And they've deemed you a liability. The agent advanced with handcuffs. Mr. Hargrove, hands behind your back. Wait, Hargrove pleaded, turning to Emily. Wait, I'll rectify this. I'll offer you funds. 15 million, 30 million. Set your terms. Just erase those files. Emily gazed at him for a prolonged moment. This man who had doomed her mother. This man who had mocked the suffering. This man who believed everything had a price tag. There is no terms, Emily said gently. My mother's existence had no price. Those 50 workers' lives had no price. Injustice has no price. The agent cuffed Hargrove. As they escorted him out, he glanced back at Emily one final time. Who are you? He croaked. How did you obtain those recordings? Emily smiled wistfully. The factory safety inspector you corrupted. His name was Robert Ellis. He was my uncle, my mother's brother. He wired himself for every encounter with you, knowing someday justice would prevail. He passed from remorse 3 years ago, but he bequeathed me the tapes. She paused. I spent a year here, observing you, biding my time for the ideal strike. You deemed me invisible. You deemed me insignificant. But the invisible ones observe all. Hargrove was marched away, his sobs echoing down the corridor. The manager neared Emily tentatively. Emily, I had no clue about your mother, about any of this. I know, Emily said wearily. That's why I kept it secret. You'd have thwarted me. You're terminated, obviously, the manager said. I can't employ you after this. I resigned 2 weeks ago, Emily said. I just didn't inform you. She removed her apron and placed it on the table. Then she exited the Platinum Suite, the Empire Lounge, and into the chilly New York evening. Outside, a throng had assembled. Media trucks clogged the avenue, lenses aimed at the edifice. Word had spread of Richard Hargrove's arrest. Journalists bellowed queries at the squad cars. Emily drew her coat close and slipped past undetected. Just another laborer en route home. Her phone rang. It was her aunt, her mother's sister. Emily. Oh Lord, Emily, I just caught the news. Confirm it's him. Confirm they've nabbed him. They've nabbed him, Aunt Clara, Emily said, tears cascading down her face. It's finished. They've nabbed him. She heard her aunt weeping on the line. Margaret would be immensely proud of you. So proud. Emily slumped on a bench at the subway station, her limbs finally yielding. The rush ebbed, leaving profound fatigue. But she also sensed something novel. Serenity. For the first time in 4 years, since witnessing her mother gasp in that hospital ward, Emily sensed serenity. Texts flooded in from unknown numbers. "Thank you." From a former Vanguard factory employee. Another. "My sister labored there. She's gone now. Thank you for justice." Then more, a deluge from strangers united in gratitude. "Thank you." Emily gazed at the New York skyline, lights twinkling like distant stars. "We achieved it, Mom," she murmured to the night. "We achieved it." The subway arrived, doors sliding open. Emily boarded, swiped her card, and claimed a seat by the window. As the train departed from the Empire Lounge, she glanced back once more. Sirens wailed, flashes popped. The bastion of elite privilege was now a crime scene. And Emily Carter, the unseen waitress, had orchestrated its downfall. 6 months later, Emily stood in a starkly different venue. It wasn't opulent like the Empire Lounge. The walls were beige, the seats metal, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly. But this space held greater significance than any lavish hall. This was courtroom number 9 at the Southern District Court in New York, and today marked Richard Hargrove's sentencing. The trial had dominated headlines across the globe for months. The recordings Emily unleashed exploded online, dissected on every broadcast, scrutinized by legal scholars, reposted billions of times on platforms worldwide. The proof was irrefutable. Not merely the tapes, but affidavits from scores of workers, from the inspector, from internal leakers at Vanguard who at last felt secure to testify. The entire corrupt edifice Hargrove had erected crumbled spectacularly. But let's rewind a bit to the trial itself, because it wasn't just a quick proceeding. It unfolded over weeks, each day revealing new layers of Hargrove's malfeasance. The prosecution painted a vivid picture, starting with expert witnesses who explained the science behind the chemical exposures, how benzene and toluene infiltrated the lungs, causing irreversible damage. Families took the stand, sharing heart-wrenching stories. A father who lost his wife and now raised 3 kids alone, a son who watched his parent waste away. Emily testified too, her voice steady as she recounted her mother's decline, the hospice nights, the crushing debt. Defense attorneys tried to discredit her, painting her as a vengeful opportunist, but the recordings spoke louder than any cross-examination. Flashbacks in the media coverage showed Hargrove's past interviews, where he bragged about efficiency and cutting red tape, now recontextualized as admissions of guilt. Emily sat in the gallery in a modest blue suit. Beside her were 20 others, kin of the deceased factory workers. They clasped hands, a chain of solidarity. The judge entered, and all rose. Judge Olivia Grant was renowned for her impartiality and severity. She regarded Richard Hargrove with unyielding disdain. Hargrove bore no resemblance to the arrogant tycoon from that gala night. He'd withered, his tailored suit baggy, his hair fully gray. Incarceration had stripped him in ways wealth never could. "Mr. Hargrove," the judge intoned, her voice resounding in the solemn court. "In my tenure, few cases have exhibited such blatant contempt for human dignity as yours. You possess the means to safeguard lives, yet opted for greed. You had the chance to rectify wrongs, yet chose deceit." Hargrove stared at his folded hands, defeated. "The evidence demonstrates you deliberately sustained perilous conditions," the judge proceeded. "You suborned officials. You fabricated documents. And as workers sickened and perished, you deployed your fortune and clout to muzzle them. You viewed humans as expendable assets." Emily felt tears trace her cheeks, but she left them. These were cathartic tears, tears of vindication. "I sentence you to 22 years for corporate homicide," the judge declared. "An extra 7 years for bribery and graft, and another 3 for impeding justice. These will serve consecutively. Total, 32 years. Murmurs swept the courtroom. It ranked among the harshest penalties for white-collar offenses in U.S. annals. Moreover, the judge appended, "I mandate the forfeiture of your assets to create a restitution fund for victims and kin." Every dollar earned amid their agony will now aid their healing. Hargrove lifted his head, tears streaking. Please, he rasped. I'm 65. 32 years ensures I perish behind bars. The judge eyed him pitilessly. Margaret Carter was 55 when she succumbed, gasping for air due to your plant. She couldn't contest her fate. Nor shall you. Guards escorted Hargrove past Emily's row. He met her gaze one last time. Hers held no gloating, no glee, just grief for the havoc wrought and solace that it ceased. Post-sentencing, Emily stood outside the courthouse with the families. Press encircled them, mics thrust forward. This time, Emily didn't evade. She advanced to the podium. My mother, Margaret Carter, was a remarkable woman, Emily stated, her tone firm and resonant. She toiled diligently lifelong. She relied on her employer for safety. That reliance was violated. She paused, addressing the lenses squarely. This isn't solely about one villainous man or firm, Emily persisted. It's about a framework permitting the mighty to deem laborers disposable. It's about currency purchasing hush, but not verity. And it's about everyday folks, uniting and persevering, toppling even the wealthiest titans. Applause erupted from a bystander, then another, swelling to encompass the plaza. Emily beamed amid tears. My mother missed this victory. But I trust, wherever she resides, she knows her existence counted, she counted, all afflicted workers counted. That night, Emily visited her mother's grave in Pittsburgh. It was an unassuming marker in a quiet burial ground, yet Emily had tended flowers there weekly for 4 years. She sat on the earth, heedless of the chill seeping through. We prevailed, Mom, Emily murmured. 32 years. He'll harm no more. The breeze stirred the leaves, and Emily fancied it her mother's whisper, Brava. The fund will assist all, Emily added. The 50 families, medical aid, fiscal relief. It revives none, but its equity. She withdrew an envelope from her purse. It was her admission to law school at NYU, focusing on labor rights and corporate oversight. All persist in the struggle, Mom, Emily vowed. Countless endure like you, victimized by untouchable firms. All advocate for them, all amplify them. She rose, caressing the stone. You instilled that all matter. To champion right, despite fear or hardship. Gratitude, Mom, for all. En route to her vehicle, Emily felt unburdened after years. The load of sorrow and fury had dissipated. Richard Hargrove had queried the room's priciest item. He'd anticipated cash, gems, or masterpieces, but Emily delivered the authentic reply. The world's costliest is truth. Once liberated, no fortune recontains it. Justice lacks a tag, it can't be traded. It's gained via valor, tenacity, and defiance against iniquity. Emily Carter, the overlooked waitress, demonstrated that oft the faintest voice sparks the grandest shift. And that evening, as rain pattered softly over Pittsburgh, Emily returned to her modest flat, brewed tea, and cracked her law tome. She had endeavors ahead, more conflicts, more echoes to boost, more verities to unveil. And she was merely commencing. But the story doesn't end there. In the months following the sentencing, Emily's life transformed in ways she never imagined. She became a symbol of resistance, invited to speak at conferences on workers' rights, her face on magazine covers as the waitress who toppled an empire. Donations poured in for the families, and a documentary was produced, chronicling the factory's history and the brave souls who fought back. Emily used her platform to lobby for stricter regulations, testifying before Congress on chemical safety standards. She mentored young activists, sharing her journey from grief to action. Meanwhile, Vanguard Pharmaceuticals underwent a massive overhaul. New leadership implemented reforms, upgraded facilities, fair wages, comprehensive health checks. The compensation fund not only paid medical bills but funded scholarships for victims' children, ensuring the cycle of poverty broke. Emily visited the factory one day, walking the halls her mother once did. Workers greeted her like a hero, sharing stories of improved conditions. Your mom would be smiling, one said. Emily nodded, feeling her presence. Years later, as a seasoned attorney, Emily took on similar cases, exposing polluters, holding CEOs accountable. Her firm became a beacon for the voiceless. And every victory, big or small, she dedicated to Margaret. The invisible had become invincible. The truth, once the most expensive thing in a room of riches, proved priceless in changing the world.